Hey everyone, this is Matt Hendricks with the Sharpening Guy, and today I'm going to show you 3 different methods of deburring a knife or getting the burr off the knife. Now, I already have other videos explaining specifically what the burr is, how to feel for it, how to make sure you have one and why it's important, and I also have other videos showing you how to sharpen a knife from start to finish. But this one is just going to specifically focus on how to deburr a knife. So we're just going to use this cheap, inexpensive knife here. Usually these with softer steel are actually harder to deburr than a higher quality knife, but this is just a cheap one that I have laying around my shop that I experiment with. So we're going to start by just getting a burr on it. So you could start with a rough stone or a medium stone, or doesn't matter, but you're sharpening your knife. And like I say, you're just gonna, get a burr. I already have a burr there. All right, so I already have a full length burr on each side. So now I need to remove the burr. And so the first thing I do is, this is a medium grit stone, and like I said, it doesn't matter if you start on your medium or if you did your coarse and then your medium. Either way, at this point, you've just stopped on your medium grit stone and you have a burr. And so before I go to my finishing stone, I'm going to start to refine the burr on the medium stone. And I'm going to do that by just doing a few edge trailing strokes like this on each side of the blade. All right, and so that's all I need to do on that. Just alternate a few at the end, bend it back and forth, weaken the burr, refine the edge with edge trailing strokes, and that's all you really need to do on the medium grit stone. And that part is going to be the same for all 3 methods. And so after that, I'm going to move to my finishing stone. And I'm going to start by doing a bunch of edge trailing strokes on each side of the blade. And by edge trailing, I mean I'm going away from the cutting edge and not into the cutting edge on the stone. And if your bevels are nice and thin like mine are, because the knife is properly thinned out, it should not take a long time to get your edge polished. And so the first method I'm going to show you is, after you've done a bunch of edge trailing strokes to get your edge polished, you're just going to take a soft piece of wood or plastic or cork or rubber or hard felt or something like that, and you're just lightly going to draw the edge of your knife through it like this a couple times. And what that does, based on microscopic imaging I've seen, is it bends the burr over so that when you go back to your stone and you take a few more strokes like this, it starts to cut it off. So the wood itself doesn't actually remove the burr, but it makes it so that the stone can cut it off. So I'm going to do a few more strokes on the stone and cut through the wood a couple more times. And I'm going to do this a few times. Now, how many times you need to do it depends on the knife, depends on your stone, depends on your heat treat, stuff like that. On average, I would say 3 to 4 times. That's the 3rd time. So we'll call this the last time here. So I'll draw my knife through the wood again a couple times. And then after the last time, I'm just going to take 1 or 2 alternating strokes on each side, just to make sure the knife edge is nice and clean and crisp. Like that. And at that point, you're done. You shouldn't be able to feel any burr on either side. You shouldn't be able to see any burr if you look really closely under a light. And your knife at this point should be sharp. So you can dry it off. All right, and so at that point, straight off the stone, you should have a sharp knife that's very usable. It should cut everything fine in the kitchen. In fact, it should, yep, it shaves hair just fine. Don't know if you can see that or not. You can grab a piece of paper here because you can probably see that better. So, a piece of paper, you can see it cuts just fine, right? So there's no burr. And this method doesn't necessarily work any better or worse than the other methods I'm going to show you, but I do believe that this is the easiest method if you're just learning how to sharpen. It's also, I believe, the most forgiving method, and it works pretty much no matter what, stones you have, no matter what steel you have, knife you have, anything like that. It also, some knives like paring knives or boning knives, or they'll have like a, a recurve near the back of the blade. And the other methods I show you can work with knives like this, but this method is just easier for knives like that. So anyway, like I said, it's not necessarily a better method, but I do believe it's the easiest method, especially if you're learning. So just keep that in mind. And I also should mention that the two stones I'm using today are the Sharpening Glass Stone 1000, and this is a Tajiro 4000. But whatever medium and fine grit stones you have should work fine, whether you have king stones or shaptons or naniwas or geshens, or it doesn't matter. They'll all work. These are just the stones I normally use, so I'm using them. So anyway, on to the second method. So the second method, I will get a new burr again so I can take it back off. So we'll just grind in a new primary edge again on the 1000 grit stone here. And I've already got a burr again. And I should say too that if you wanted to, after the last method, you could strop your knife on a hard, smooth piece of leather or on a sheet of newspaper laid over your stone or something like that. And if there was any residual burr, that would have basically gotten it off for you. But clearly, if you did a good job, you didn't need to do that. You should be able to deburr without doing that. So anyway, now that I've got a burr on both sides, I'm going to again start refining the edge on the medium grit stone with edge trailing strokes. Doesn't matter exactly how many you do, really. Depends again on the knife, the stone, how much pressure you're using, everything like that. But anyway, that's enough. So I'll move on to my finishing stone again. And like I said, getting a burr off of a higher quality knife will actually be easier than off of this knife, which just is, has soft stainless, cheap steel in it. So anyway, just like with the first method, I'm going to start polishing the cutting edge by doing edge trailing strokes. And again, since my edge bevel is nice and thin, it's not going to take long. And so what I'm going to do here is, with this method, it's really important that I get the burr really weak and nice and small before I go to remove it. Now, overall, this method is actually the fastest of the three methods, but it's also probably the hardest to execute properly. Now, I'm doing all this in any of these methods. I'm never changing the angle, so I'm always deburring and sharpening at the exact same angle. All right, so now that I've done this, I'm satisfied that I've really refined my burr. It's really small. I folded it back and forth a bunch of times. It's ready to come off. So this technique is called jointing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the knife perpendicular to the stone, so like this, straight up and down, and super lightly I'm going to run it over the stone like this. And you want less than the weight of the blade, so not even the weight of the blade, like super lightly. And you're just going to set it down on the stone and along the full length of the blade. You just very carefully, in a very straight line, going to cut the burr off like that. And so at this point, I can't feel any burr because I just completely cut it off. And so now all I have to do is, when I did that, I created a tiny microscopic flat spot. And so I'm just going to do a few more edge trailing strokes like this that are alternating, just to bring that back to a point. And it's not going to take many because it was so microscopic because my pressure was so light and the burr was so ready to come off. But just a few like that, and at this point I should be back to having an edge that's nice and sharp and pointy. You can't see any light reflect off it, anything like that, and it should be super sharp, every bit as sharp as I showed you in the first method. And so I'll dry it off here a second. And anyway, so again, you should be able to use the knife straight off the stone like that. Now, if you wanted to, again, you could strop it afterwards, and I can actually show you that. But basically, if you deburred properly, you shouldn't have to strop it afterwards, and your knife should still perform really well. All right, so I think I got this dry. So again, it should be able to shave hair. Don't know if you can see that or not. Should be able to cut paper just fine. And if I did want to strop it, again, I just take like a nice smooth hardback strop like this. Don't want to get that wet, but oh well. And just strop it just like this. Same angle I sharpened at, just light to medium pressure. And you don't need to strop a ton if you did a good job, because you shouldn't have any burr anyway. But if you did, this will just kind of buff the rest of that burr off. A few strokes on each side like that. And again, at this point, you could still test your knife. Still shaves hair fine. Still cuts paper fine. So anyway, so that's the second method of deburring. Like I said, in my opinion, that's probably the hardest of the three methods to actually do properly, but it does work very well when you do it properly. And so it's also the fastest method. So, you know, if you're concerned about time, or if you just want to try a different method, that one works really well. So anyway, we will now move on to the third method. And actually, before I move on to the third method, if you were using the second method, after you joint the edge, you could take 4 or 5 backward strokes, and then you could draw your knife through a wood once or twice, take a couple more, and then call that good. And so you could kind of combine the second method and then the first method to save time. But if you weren't quite as good at the second method, that might be able to help you. So anyway, but moving on to the third method. So I'm going to get a new burr again. And I've got a burr along the full length of the blade there. And I've got a burr along the full length of the blade here. So again, just like before, start refining your burr on the medium grip stone. And then you can move on to the finishing stone. And just like the other 2 times, you're going to start refining your burr on your finishing stone using edge trailing strokes. And so this method is also going to deburr straight on the stone like the last method, but you're going to do it differently. So after you've refined your burr quite a bit, you're going to set yourself up by taking a backward stroke on one side of the blade, and then on the other side, you're going to start at the back of the knife here, and at the exact same angle you've been sharpening at, and you're just going to lightly move your knife across the stone parallel to the cutting edge of your knife. Just like that, and that's going to start to cut that burr off. And then after that, you'll do a few more edge trailing strokes like this. And then again, you'll set yourself up by doing an edge trailing stroke on one side, and draw the knife laterally at the same angle you sharpened at on the other side. And then you're going to repeat that a few times, right? Where you do a few edge trailing strokes, set yourself up, then do a lateral stroke. And so you can see, since you have to do this more times, this method takes a little bit more time than the second method, but it's also a little bit easier method of deburring on your stone and not having to have like an extra block of wood or something there. All right, and then after the last time you do that, just 1 or 2 edge trailing strokes like this should, you know, clean the edge up and again make it nice and sharp and pointy and all the little teeth running the right way. So anyway, you should be able to feel your knife. You shouldn't have any burr. And so again, we can dry this off. Careful not to cut yourself when you're drying your knife off. You can always pull your knife away like this if you want, so that you make sure you don't cut yourself. Anyway, so straight off the stone like that, your knife should be sharp enough, again, to shave hair, which it clearly is, shaves really well. Again, it should be sharp enough to slice paper like that, no problem. And so you should have a perfectly usable edge straight off the stone like that and not have to do anything else to it. Now again, if you wanted to, you could take a strop, and you could do this with any of the 3 methods like I was saying, and you could just, you know, strop it a few times like this. And, you know, when you're done with that, you still should have a really sharp edge. So anyway, I hope that helps. And so yeah, hope that helps. And if you you know, have any questions, you can let me know. But otherwise, those are 3 pretty straightforward methods of deburring that will get you really great edges just off the stone without having to use a strop. Or if you want to use a strop afterwards, you're welcome to do that too. So thanks for watching.